Do you have any idea what this costs? Felicity Ward's voice cut through the penthouse dining room like a blade finding the exact joint between ribs. Her fingers closed around Gemma Ashby's forearm and yanked, hard enough that the crystal pitcher Gemma had been steadying on the sideboard tipped and shattered across the marble floor, which only made things worse, which Felicity immediately decided was also Gemma's fault. You clumsy, stupid, she yanked again, pulling Gemma forward so that every guest seated around the long mahogany table had a perfect view. 40 people, partners, investors, a federal judge who everyone pretended was just a family friend, and 3 men who had flown in from Miami and did not appear on any corporate paperwork. All of them watching, none of them moving. Gemma Ashby did not scream. She did not stumble. She simply absorbed the yank without letting her knees buckle, kept her expression neutral, and thought, I should have seen this coming. Wine from the dropped decanter was spreading across the floor, soaking the hem of Felicity's ivory gown where it pooled against the stone. That was what had started this. One of the catering staff, a 20-year-old named Brinley, who was working her first private event and had been trembling visibly since 6 o'clock, had slipped on the freshly waxed floor near the drinks cart. The bottle tilted. Gemma had lunged from her position at the sideboard, caught it in both hands before it could crash into the antique credenza, and managed to lose only a few ounces of Barolo across the floor and the tip of Felicity's shoe. The girl had been spared. The credenza was fine. Felicity's shoe would clean. None of that mattered now. I knew the moment Knox hired someone like you that standards in this house were going to slip. Felicity's grip hadn't loosened. Her voice had gotten quieter, which was somehow worse, the kind of quiet that fills a room better than shouting. You're supposed to stay invisible. Women like you don't belong in a room like this. You're here to keep the spreadsheets tidy and disappear. That's it. Gemma's eyes were level, calm in a way that cost her something. 40 people watched. Not one of them moved. Let go of her arm. The voice came from the entrance to the dining room. Not loud, not angry. The kind of voice a person uses when they are so far past the need to shout that volume feels redundant. Knox Serrano had come back inside. He'd been on the terrace for 12 minutes, finishing a call that could not be interrupted. His head of security had been with him. Neither of them had known. He walked back through the glass terrace doors with his jacket over one arm and stopped. Felicity's fingers opened immediately. She turned with a practiced smile and the beginning of an explanation already on her lips. Knox wasn't looking at her. He crossed the room at a pace that suggested nothing was urgent. The guests at the table understood anyway and found reasons to look at the floor, at their wine, at the very interesting grain of the mahogany in front of them. The federal judge cleared his throat. One of the Miami men quietly set down his fork. Serrano stopped 2 feet from Gemma and looked at her forearm, where 4 finger-shaped marks were already beginning to surface on her pale skin. Mrs. Ashby, his voice was measured. Are you injured? Gemma blinked once. No employer had ever asked her that. I'm fine, Mr. Serrano. He looked at her arm again, then at her face. Whatever he was searching for, she wasn't sure he found it. She had spent 2 years perfecting the expression she was wearing, the one that said, "Nothing to see here. Please don't look too long. I'm fine." He looked back at Felicity. "Get your things," he said. Felicity laughed, a small disbelieving sound. "Knox, I'm not asking you to wait for an explanation." He spoke without heat, without performance. He was already turning away from her, which was the most precise form of dismissal available to a man in his position. "Renfield will see you out. You can call tomorrow for whatever you left behind." For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Felicity Ward had attended this quarterly dinner for 3 years running. She had redecorated the private den on the east side of the penthouse. She had introduced herself to visiting diplomats. As the woman who ran this household, she stood now in an ivory gown with a wine-stained hem and an expression that could have meant anything: rage, disbelief, the particular horror of realizing you have misread a situation so completely that there is no recovering it. "You're choosing her." She pointed at Gemma without looking at her, the way someone points at furniture. "You're choosing the bookkeeper." "I'm choosing not to employ people who put their hands on my staff." He turned back, and something in his expression stopped her cold. Not anger, something quieter and colder than anger. Those two things aren't the same. A man appeared at the dining room entrance. Renfield, head of Serrano's security detail, who had worked for Knox for 11 years and had learned to read the tone of his footsteps. He looked at Felicity and inclined his head toward the door. She left, heels sharp against the marble, the kind of exit that would have been dramatic if anyone's eyes had followed her all the way to the elevator. Nobody did. Knox turned back to the table. His expression was unchanged. "Forgive the interruption," he said, in exactly the tone of a man who would not be interrupted again. "We were discussing the infrastructure acquisition." The federal judge found his voice first. "Right, yes, the Northern Corridor." And just like that, 40 people resumed the dinner, as though the last 4 minutes had belonged to a different evening. Gemma slipped out of the dining room, walked down the service hallway to the caterer's prep station, and stood at the stainless steel counter for 30 seconds before she trusted her hands to be steady enough to do anything useful. In the kitchen, Brinley was standing very still against the far wall, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red. "She's gone?" Brinley whispered. "She's gone." The girl's face crumpled for 1 second, then straightened. "I'm sorry if I hadn't slipped." "You slipped on a wet floor in shoes that weren't meant for service work," Gemma said, pulling a clean towel from the rack. "It happens. What doesn't happen again is you wearing those shoes to an event. Next time, talk to me first about what you need." "I could have gotten you fired." Gemma thought about the marks on her forearm. "You didn't." She handed Brinley a glass of water and went to help reroute the service timing, because the soup course had been held 7 minutes waiting for the incident to resolve. And now the second course was going to crowd the window if someone didn't adjust. She was recalibrating the plating schedule with the head chef when she became aware, in the back of her neck, of being watched. She turned. Knox Serrano was standing in the kitchen doorway. His jacket was off now, sleeves rolled to the forearm. He looked out of place in a kitchen, the way all powerful men did. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like a thing that didn't need to adapt to its surroundings because its surroundings adapted to it. "The soup course is stalled," Gemma said, "because someone had to say something. I was trying to fix the timing." "I know." He walked further into the kitchen. "I watched you handle this entire evening for the last 40 minutes before I went to the terrace." She didn't know what to do with that. She stayed where she was. He set his water glass down on the counter. "You adjusted the wine pairing after the Holloway group moved seats to the east side of the table, because you noticed 2 of them don't drink red." Gemma said nothing. "You rerouted the canapé service when the ambassador arrived 40 minutes late, so he'd have food without the room noticing the adjustment. It wasn't complicated. I just watched where the gaps were. That's not accounting. I was in hotel management before I was an accountant, long time ago." Something shifted in his expression. "Why aren't you still?" She was quiet for a moment. Life changed, she said, not dismissively, just as a fact. He studied her the way she had learned to recognize as genuine attention, not the scanning, measuring look that men like him usually wore, but something slower, more careful. "The marks on your arm," he said. She had already pulled her sleeve down. They're fine. They're not fine, he said, with exactly zero heat and complete certainty. And they're going to be documented before you leave tonight. That's not negotiable. She opened her mouth to argue and found she didn't have one. He said it like a rule that had already been in effect, and the only thing that had changed was that she was now aware of it. All right, she said. All right, he repeated then. How far behind is the soup? That was the strangest part of the evening. Knox Serrano stood in the kitchen for the next 20 minutes while Gemma walked the team through the recovery plan. And he didn't take over, didn't give orders, just stayed in the room the way a person stays when they find a place they didn't expect to feel settled in. The staff stopped, walking wide around him. By the 4th minute, by the 10th, the sous chef was asking his opinion on a sauce temperature, and Knox answered without condescension, and the sauce was better for it. When the last guest had been put into a car, Gemma was in the accounting suite on the penthouse's lower level, running the final reconciliation on the evening's expenses when Winston Graves appeared in the doorway. Winston had been with Knox since before the penthouse, before the legitimate companies, before the name Serrano Holdings meant anything on a Bloomberg terminal. He was 62, kept his grey hair cut close, and wore reading glasses on a chain he only put on when he thought no one was watching. He served as Serrano's consigliere in ways no job title fully captured. He's asking for the evening report, Winston said. I'll have it in the morning. He's asking for it now. A pause. He's also asking about you. Gemma looked up. Not the report. You, specifically. Winston folded his hands behind his back. He asked how long you've been here. I told him 2 years. He asked why he'd never spoken to you directly before. She turned back to her screen. Because I'm very good at not being noticed. Were, Winston said, past tense. She didn't answer. Winston settled into the chair across from her desk, which he had never done before. In 2 years, he had been nothing but professionally cordial, the kind of cordial that comes from respect rather than warmth. Now, he set his glasses on their chain and looked at her with the expression of a man deciding how much to say. What you did tonight, adjusting the service, fixing the timing, staying in the room when anyone else would have left, that's the 4th time in 2 years that you've held something together here that nobody else noticed was falling apart. He let that land. The March Gala, when the AV system failed during the donor presentation. The October board dinner, when half the catering staff didn't show and you ran the kitchen alone for 3 hours. The security audit in January that you completed in 2 days because you spotted a vulnerability before our own team did. You submitted the report and went back to your desk. Gemma's hands had stilled on the keyboard. Why? He asked. It was a simple question. She had never heard it asked before. I was hired as a bookkeeper, she said. And you've been doing the work of 6 people, he said, not unkindly, without asking for a single thing in return. She looked at her laptop for a moment. I needed the job. I wasn't in a position to be difficult. Are you in that position now? She thought about her mother's medical bills, which she'd finished paying 7 months ago. She thought about the lease on her apartment that was finally, for the first time in 4 years, month to month, rather than a crisis. She thought about the consulting firm that had offered her a position in February, which she'd turned down because she hadn't known how to explain how she'd ended up here, in this job. And it had been easier to stay. Getting there, she said. Winston nodded slowly. He's going to ask you something tonight. I wanted you to know beforehand so you could think about your answer. What kind of something? The kind that changes your title. He stood. Try not to say no out of habit. Knox was in the private study on the upper level, standing at the window that looked out over the city. He didn't turn when she knocked, just said, "Come in," which she did, and waited. Sit down, Miss Ashby. Gemma's fine. He turned, then. In the quieter light of the study, away from the formal dining room, he looked less like a performance and more like a person. The sleeves were still rolled up. A glass of scotch sat on the desk, untouched. Gemma, he said, testing the shape of it. She sat. He didn't. He stayed near the window, like he was keeping himself at a measured distance, giving her the room. Winston tells me you came out of hotel management, certified, graduated top of your program. A long time ago. Long being what, 5 years? 7. What happened? She had given this answer before. In the stripped-down version she'd perfected for job interviews and small talk. Family circumstances. I needed income that was immediate and reliable, and the hotel management track takes connections I didn't have anymore. So I used the other degree. You have 2 degrees. Finance and hospitality management. I doubled up. She'd been fast back then. She'd been a lot of things back then. The finance one got me employed faster. He was quiet for a moment. What would it take, Knox said, to stop hiding? She hadn't expected that framing. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. He said it without judgment, which made it harder to deflect. You've been in this organization for 2 years doing work that most people in positions above yours don't know how to do. And you've done it quietly, on purpose, so no one looks at you directly long enough to notice. A pause. I'm looking directly at you. Her hands were still in her lap. She made herself keep them there. Tonight, he said, you managed a 40-person private dinner, adjusted every service variable in real time, kept a panicking kitchen functional, and absorbed something that should never have happened to you in a room you work in. He let that sit. And then you went to the accounting suite to finish the reconciliation. The reconciliation still needs to be done. Gemma. She stopped. He crossed the room and put a folder on the desk in front of her. She opened it. The title on the cover sheet read, Director of Operations, Serrano Holdings Private Division. She looked up. I've had 3 operations directors in the last 4 years, he said. The first was good with numbers and couldn't read a room. The second could read a room and couldn't manage people. The third managed people by making them afraid of him, which worked until it didn't. He sat down across from her. I've been watching you do all 3 things simultaneously, in the background, without being asked. I was being paid to do a much smaller job, she said. You were. That stops tonight. She looked at the folder, at the title, at the number on the 3rd page, which was more than she'd made in the last 4 years combined. Something in her chest was doing something inconvenient, and she needed it to stop. I don't know if I can do this, she said. You've been doing it, he said. You just haven't had the authority to match. She looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to before, because looking directly at Knox Serrano for too long felt like a choice that would cost you something. What happened with Felicity, she said. You didn't do that because of this. He held her gaze without flinching. No, I did that because what she did was wrong, and I don't allow it in my house, and I should have recognized what she was a long time ago. A pause. This is a separate thing, a better thing. She was quiet for a moment. She's going to make trouble. She's going to try, he said. She won't succeed. He said it the way he said everything, with the calm of a man who didn't make predictions he wasn't prepared to guarantee. She believed him, which was the strange part. She had spent 7 years learning not to believe people who said things would be fine. She believed this one anyway. I'll need to think about it, she said. You have until morning, he said. After that, I'm putting your name on the door regardless. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. He watched it happen with an expression she couldn't quite categorize, not a smile, but the shape of one, somewhere behind his eyes. She took the folder. Hey. Felicity Ward sent 2 carefully worded emails in the following week that strongly implied, without stating directly, that Gemma had engineered the evening's incident for personal gain. Knox's legal team responded to all 3 recipients within the hour. The board observer who received one of those emails had been at the dinner, had watched Felicity grab Gemma's arm in front of 40 witnesses, and did not pursue the matter further. Neither did the investors. Knox did not tell Gemma about the emails. Winston did later, when she specifically asked why the board observer had been unusually warm at the first quarterly review under her new title. Because he saw what he saw, Winston said, and he knows the difference. Gemma Ashby took the title. She took the office. She took the authority she had been performing without, invisibly, for 2 years, and she learned, slowly and with some difficulty, how to stop making herself smaller than she was. It took a few weeks before she stopped, triple-checking whether she was allowed to redirect a vendor. A few more before she trusted herself in the conference room with Knox's senior partners, where she had previously always found a reason to be somewhere else. The self-consciousness didn't disappear, but it stopped running her. The staff, the caterers, the household managers, the security rotations, treated her the same as before, which was the part she hadn't expected. She had assumed a title would make her strange to them. Instead, they just started telling her things directly, instead of routing around her. Problems reached her faster. Solutions came back the same way. One morning 4 months in, Knox found her in the building's lower prep kitchen at 6 a.m., walking the overnight crew through a timing change for an event that wasn't until the following Tuesday. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed him, and he thought about what Winston had said the night after the incident, that Gemma Ashby was the kind of person this organization had been missing without knowing it, and that he was beginning to understand exactly what he meant. There were evenings when the work kept them both late, and the penthouse emptied of staff, and it was just the 2 of them in the private study, with the city going dark outside, and a problem that needed solving. She had a way of thinking he found clarifying. She didn't perform. She didn't manage him. She told him the truth about things, with the directness of someone who had spent a long time being overlooked, and had decided there was no point in anything other than the truth. He found himself constructing reasons to stay in the same room. She found herself noticing when he was tired, and when the tension in his shoulders had nothing to do with the work, and when he was making a decision from anger rather than judgment, which was rare but not impossible. She told him when she noticed. He listened, which continued to surprise her. On a Thursday evening in November, they were on the terrace after a 12-hour day, not talking about anything in particular. The city was doing its nighttime thing. 2 empty coffee cups sat between them, and a folder neither of them had opened in 40 minutes. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You always ask that first," he said. "You can just ask." A beat. Why me specifically? There were 100 easier choices for the director position. He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't make choices based on easy." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked back at the city. "Because you stayed. When it would have been completely reasonable to leave, that night and a dozen nights before it, you stayed and did the work. Not for me. Not because anyone was watching." He paused. "I've spent a long time around people who perform everything they do. You're the first person I've met in I don't know how long who just does things because of who you are, not what you need from me." The honesty of it caught her off guard, the way his honesty always did. He said things like that the way he gave operational directives, like they were already true, and he was simply informing her of them. "That's a terrifying amount of trust for someone you've known 8 months, she said. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about that." And he turned to look at her, in the city light, The coldness that everyone talked about when they talked about Nox Serrano was nowhere in his face. She had stopped seeing it months ago. She wasn't sure it had ever been the whole picture. "And I'd rather be wrong about you," he said, "than spend another year not saying it." Something in her chest did the inconvenient thing again. This time she let it. She reached across the space between them and put her hand over his, quietly, in the way she had learned things got done best, without ceremony, without announcement, simply because it was time. He turned his hand over beneath hers. His thumb found her knuckle. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. Below them, the city carried on. The Serrano Holdings penthouse stayed lit from within, warm against the November dark, in the way that a place becomes warm when the right people finally stop pretending they belong somewhere smaller.